The first thing you see is not a war. It's a clock. Not the round clock on the wall, but the digital clock on the skyscraper, the numbers spiking in pale red. Debt, deficit, military spending. A Spanish galleon leaves the New World, its hull groaning under the weight of silver. A British war room in 1916, smoke, maps, and men drawing boundaries between continents they barely understand. Soviet parade in Red Square, missiles and tanks roll over leaders lying on a dead body. 3 different languages, 3 different ideologies, 3 different centuries. All are heading towards the same destination. Fall. Not an accident, not an anomaly, a pattern. There is a 7-stage sequence that has killed 3 global superpowers in the past 500 years. Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union followed suit. And in 2025, the United States looks like a country that has passed the first 5 steps and is now standing on the edge of the 6th. The issue here is not the disappearance of the clique. This article is about math, motivation, and how power works when it thinks it can never die. Why empires always go too far, spend too much, and print more than necessary. The currencies that once dominated the world are now a thing of history. Why is it always the common man who discovers the truth last? At the grocery store, not in the halls of Congress. And how to read the signals in real time, instead of waiting for a headline that says, "Everything collapsed overnight." Because when empires fall, they don't really fall overnight. They rot slowly. Then one day, gravity realized it. Welcome to the 7-stage collision model. Spain, England, Soviet Union. And the annoying question is, what if the United States is already in stage 5? Before getting into each stage, you need to know what a crash actually looks like. Most people imagine tanks rolling down the main streets, foreign flags hanging from Capitol buildings, enemy armies planting their flags in the heart of the empire. It doesn't work that way. An empire does not die when it is defeated. It dies when its numbers don't understand anymore. It all started with a simple imbalance: more obligations than income, more territory than resources, more promises than reality can deliver. At first, nothing looks wrong. Money can still buy a lot of things. The military still threatens the people. Politicians still talk about power, leadership, and values. But behind the speeches, reality is changing. The factory closed, but the debt remained. The tax base decreased, but the military increased. Money supply skyrocketed, but real output did not. The first cracks were not visible from the palace balcony. You see them on the street. The shelves are a little thinner than last year. The roads are getting worse. Paying the bills is getting a little harder, even though official inflation is under control. Meanwhile, the empire continues to operate as if it were still at its peak. This was the real beginning of the collapse. When story, what is a country in reality? What it can afford is gone, and that void is filled with debt and rejection. The 7 stages are just a way of describing that gap as it widens. Phase 1, global outreach and military burden. Stage 2, currency devaluation and currency abuse. Stage 3, the spiral of debt and budget deficit. Stage 4, erosion of real production capacity. Stage 5, internal social breakdown and loss of cohesion. Stage 6, loss of reserves and loss of confidence from outside. Stage 7, rapid political and imperial collapse. Every empire we are about to study passed through those doors, and each one told himself he would be the first to escape punishment. Our first case study, Spain. At first, the empire was too big to fail. Imagine the late 1500s. The soldiers wore ornate armor. Priests are blessing ships under billowing white sails. Great galleons left the Americas loaded with silver from Potosi and Zacatecas, gold from looted temples, treasures Europe had never seen on this scale before. Spain not only found wealth, it found female wealth. By the mid-1500s, the country controlled a large amount of the world's precious metals. For a time, Spanish silver coins were the closest thing to a common currency in the world. Phase 1, overstretching. If you think having lots of money makes Spain cautious, think again. The Spanish crown decided that wealth meant one thing: the ability to fight everyone. War in Italy, the war against the Ottoman Empire, religious wars in the Low Countries, naval conflict with Britain, transatlantic and Pacific campaigns. Think about maintaining the logistics of 16th century border bases, fleets, armies, garrisons. The costs are prohibitive, At one point, nearly half of the royal income was spent directly on military expenditures. That is not a strong defense. This is a slow act of self-amputation. But the king looked at the fleet and the map and saw strength, not risk. He believes that the flow of silver will never end. Phase 2. Currency devaluation. There's one problem with spending like a god. Even the silver ocean has a bottom. As costs rise, taxes are no longer enough. So Spain resorted to the oldest trick in imperial strategy, counterfeiting. They begin to erode the silver content. Mix base metals like copper while keeping the coin's face value. In theory, nothing has changed. The numbers stamped on the money are all the same. In fact, each penny buys less. Merchants are not stupid. They weighed the coins. They tested the purity. They have adjusted the price. The result was predictable: inflation and loss of confidence. Prices rise as the real value of money falls. Foreigners demand better coins or higher prices. In Spain, people have to run faster to stay in place. Phase 3, debt spiral. Even that is not enough. Despite the river of gold and the growing economic depression, the empire's hunger still outweighed its income. War must be paid, courts must be maintained, aristocrats must be bribed. So the crown is passed to the lender, Italian financiers, German financiers, anyone with idle capital. Loans were made on the assumption that the future would be like the past. Silver ships would arrive on schedule, enemies would be defeated, taxes would be paid. When the math doesn't add up, the crown does what overextended empires often do. It went bankrupt. Once, and again, and again. Bankruptcy has become a routine policy tool. Each restructuring has pushed the problem further, while damaging Spain's reputation as a reliable borrower. The template has been set up. Spend more than you earn. Devaluation. Borrow to fill the gap. Default. When you can't pretend anymore, then repeat. Phase 4. Empty the product. This is the part that almost no one thinks of when they romanticize the Spanish treasure fleet. All the easy money job looks so stupid. Why invest decades building an industry when you can easily buy finished goods with imported silver? Why develop your own shipyards, textile mills, or tool manufacturers when Italian, Dutch, and French artisans are happy to sell to you? Spain has fallen into a familiar role. It has become a consumer empire. Silver in, goods out. Not Spanish goods, foreign goods. The economy focuses on extraction and spending, not innovation and production. Being a courtier, a soldier, or an official was a respectable thing. Becoming a producer? Below the elite. Over time, Spain's real manufacturing base has shrunk. Food, clothing, weapons, even ships were increasingly imported from foreign countries, paid for with metals taken from other people's lands. When the mining output decreases, the whole machine will shake. There is no diversified and resilient domestic economy to rely on. Just promises on paper and fading glory. Phase 5, social degradation. Once the economy declines, society declines too. As the flow of silver slowed and costs remained high, the Spanish state tightened its control over the remaining working classes by imposing taxes, restrictions, and controls. Jobs are drying up. Crime is on the rise. The streets of major cities are filled with beggars, war veterans, and those who have no place in an economy built on the illusion of lasting wealth. The most talented Spaniards, merchants, artisans, thinkers, either left for more dynamic places like the Netherlands and France, or accepted that their future would be limited by a rigid hierarchy that valued blood over ability. Brain drain is not a new concept. It is one of the final chapters of every aging empire. By the 1600s and 1700s, Spain was still a major country on the map. But size is not strength. The superpower of the 1500s had become a cultural backwater with beautiful churches, ancient palaces, and little influence on the future of the world. From the outside, visitors can tour the remaining architectural works. Seen from the inside, this is the story of a society that traded long-term power for short-term glory and then ran out of glory. If Spain was the original model, Britain was the next industrial model, this time with railroads, steamships, and global finance. At its height, British power seemed unbreakable. An empire that stretched across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. Naval-controlled sea lanes can appear almost anywhere. One currency, the pound, was used from Buenos Aires to Bombay. Phase 1 again, over the limit. Garrisons, coaling stations, colonial administrators, telegraph cables, shipping routes. The maintenance of such machinery was extremely expensive. Then the 20th century brought real consequences. 2 world wars in less than 30 years. He chose to fight both sides. It won them, but in winning, it mortgaged its future. To finance total war, London borrowed on an unprecedented scale, especially from a rising power on the other side of the Atlantic. The empire survived the gun war. It will not survive after interest is paid. Phase 2. Currency stress and collapse. Before the war, the position of the pound depended on one idea. You can turn it into gold at a fixed rate. The war shattered that illusion. Gold is used to purchase weapons, food, fuel, and allies. When the war ended, the British reserve forces were a shadow of their former selves, but leaders tried to pretend nothing had changed. They tried to lock the pound back to its old value, as if the devastation and debt had never happened. The result? A currency too expensive for a weakened economy. British exports became uncompetitive. Factories closed or operated at reduced capacity. High unemployment rate. To protect the reputation of the pound, interest rates must remain sky-high. Domestic growth has been sacrificed in exchange for international prestige. In the end, reality won. Money is forced to lose value. The symbol of empire is nothing more than a troubled national unit. Stages 3 and 4 saw mounting debt and subsequent decline of the empire. We will take a deeper look at England in Part 2. By now, you should have seen enough to recognize the outline. Spain, England. Next is the Soviet Union. Different economies, different systems, same orbit. These 7 stages are not a theory, they are an autopsy. And once you see them clearly, it becomes very difficult to look at the current United States and its debt, its overseas bases, its money printing, its angry politics, and still say, this time is different. We will find out how Britain and the Soviet Union perfected this model, how to map the 7 stages clearly. And why does the United States in 2025 look like a country that has completed steps 1 through 5 and is quietly moving toward step 6? Because history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes, and nowadays, rhymes are becoming more and more popular. The fall of Britain was not a sudden explosion, like the lungs slowly deflating with each breath, until there is no more air left. We left with little money because of unrealistic expectations and a mountain of debt that made even victory feel like defeat. Now we enter a period where the empire begins to disintegrate, not because we want to, but because we have to. Britain, the second meaning of the collapse model. It is 1945 now. London still stands, but weakly. The skyline is a jagged silhouette of bombed buildings. Factories are closing, food is rationed. And the empire that once ruled a quarter of humanity is now bankrupt. On paper, Britain won World War II. In reality, it traded global dominance for survival. The US and Canadian debt is so large that even victory parades seem like announcements of overpayment. That leads directly to Stage 3, the debt spiral. The bills continued to mount even after the war ended. The soldiers must be sent home. Colonies must be governed. The welfare state must be funded, but no money. The balance sheet was destroyed, and the pound lost its credibility. So Britain did what all declining empires do. It borrows more, prints more, pretends more. Stage 4. Loss of empire. Empires don't fall because they want them to. They die because their grip weakens. India, the jewel in the crown, was the first nation to collapse. It was not that England suddenly embraced moral enlightenment, but because it is no longer able to keep the crown shiny. By 1947, Gandhi no longer needed to ask the British to leave. Britain can no longer stay. Then to the Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, Caribbean region. The flag has been lowered. The borders have changed. The map has been zoomed out. In just a generation, the global empire had become an island nation with fading memories. The British elite insist this is not decline, but simply transformation. After all, the country still has a navy, nuclear weapons, and a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. But the world knows better. Power shifted west across the Atlantic. Stage 5. Social and political decline. By the 1960s and 1970s, Britain was not in a violent collapse, but in a gradual decline. You can see the details of Phase 5 daily. The strike has shut down public services. Factories closed, a currency that is no longer worth buying or selling abroad. A generation grew up with the promise that prosperity would return next year. The country that wrote the rules of global finance is now begging for an IMF bailout in 1976. When an empire reaches this stage, it still has museums, history, culture, and prestige. What it doesn't have is leverage, and leverage is what makes a superpower. England was not conquered. The economy is running out of oxygen. USSR, the rapid collapse. If Spain weakened slowly and England weakened steadily, the Soviet Union collapsed immediately. No empire in history has collapsed so quickly despite appearing mighty on the surface. Think about the images we associate with the Soviet Union. Tanks abound, missile silos, cold-faced leaders watching from the stands, astronauts in orbit. But behind those images is an economy that is barely functioning. Phase 1. Military overexpansion. The Soviet military budget was spent 15 to 20% GDP, a number so high that it almost resembles a self-inflicted wound. They don't just compare individual U.S. aircraft. They are propping up an entire network of allies and dependencies across the globe. Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea, Syria, Angola, Eastern Europe. Wherever the United States had influence, the Soviet Union felt compelled to have similar influence. With an economy only one-third the size, if the Cold War was a weightlifting competition, America is building strength. The Soviet Union was struggling with a bone problem. Finally, something needs to change. Phase 2. Economic stagnation. Central planning stifles innovation. Factories produce goods that no one wants. The technology is decades out of date. Agriculture failed so badly that the Soviet Union had to import grain from the West, its ideological arch-enemy. The empire can build nuclear submarines, but not fresh bread. Phase 3. Currency analysis. The ruble has never been trusted, even by its own people. It is not a real currency, but just a fictional accounting product. People secretly hoard dollars. The government paid its trade bills in gold and oil because foreigners refused to accept rubles as a means of payment. Then oil prices fell sharply. Gold reserves also gradually decreased. Suddenly, the Soviet Union had no way to pay for imports or support its satellites. This is not a military crisis. This is a cash flow crisis. Stage 4. Loss of empire. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, it was not symbolic. This is a financial issue. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany did not suddenly rebel. They rebelled because Moscow could no longer afford to subsidize the system. Within 2 years, the Eastern Bloc had disappeared. Within just 3 years, the entire Soviet Union collapsed. No foreign troops. There was no invasion. Just raw economic reality, finally asserting itself. Stage 5. Complete collapse. August 1991, the government is paralyzed. December 1991, the Soviet flag is lowered for the last time. A superpower with thousands of nuclear weapons, millions of soldiers, and half a century of global influence collapsed in less than a year. 100 days. Modern audiences underestimate the shock of this incident. People expected communism to last for centuries. On the contrary, it died faster than most other corporations. Stage 7 looks like this. Political collapse comes quickly after all the previous stages have hollowed out the system. The 7-stage collapse model. All 3 empires followed it. Let's list the pattern clearly. Phase 1. Beyond global scope. Phase 2. Currency devaluation, currency distortion. Phase 3. Debt spiral, budget stress. Phase 4. The decline in actual production capacity. Phase 5. Social decline and detachment. Phase 6. Loss of reserves, loss of trust from outside. Phase 7. Rapid collapse. Spain have completed all 7 goals. He completed all 7 goals. The Soviet Union achieved all 7 goals. 3 empires, 3 times collapsed, 3 identical samples. And now we return to the present. United States, 4th implementation. This is the part that makes some viewers angry. But anger doesn't change math. Let's divide the United States into 7 completed stages. Phase 1, overcome, complete. The United States is becoming more active. 50 military bases, a broad army in more than 150 countries. A defense commitment that no nation in history has ever made at the same time. The annual military budget has ended. $50 billion, larger than the area of the next 10 countries combined. However, hiring is down, equipment is aging. Multiple strategic battlefields are heating up at the same time. Like Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union, the empire was being stretched beyond its economic capacity to comfortably support it. Phase 2, complete currency devaluation. Done. Since 1971, the dollar has been legal tender. Since 2000, the money supply has increased many times. Since 2020, trillions of dollars have been created out of nothing. The dollar still works, but so were Spanish silver coins, until they weren't. Recession looks different in the digital age, but the consequence is that real purchasing power will decrease. Stage 3, the debt spiral is complete. $34 trillion in federal debt. Over $1 trillion in interest each year is more than the defense budget. Annual deficit. Debt is growing faster than GDP. The United States borrows money to pay interest on a previous loan. Exactly what Spain did. Exactly what Britain did. Exactly what the Soviet Union did. Stage 4. Complete loss of production capacity. The factories are no more. Supply chains are being moved overseas. A trade deficit of over $800 billion per year. America doesn't produce the things an empire must produce to keep it running, from pharmaceuticals to microchips to essential materials. Financialization replaces industrial power. Imports replace domestic production capacity. Spain 2.0, English 2.0, Rome 2.0. Stage 5, social decline. Complete chaos doesn't start when people riot. Chaos begins when people lose trust. Confidence is at a record low. Crime is on the rise. Homelessness is on the rise. Drug overdoses kill more than 100,000 people each year. Political polarization is at an all-time high. The birth rate is falling. The family structure collapsed. This is not a partisan debate. This is a structural signal. Every empire falls into this phase when internal cohesion is broken down by economic pressures. That means the United States is now entering Stage 6, loss of reserve fund. Not quite yet, but the first cracks are appearing. BRICS countries are looking for alternatives. Saudi Arabia signs oil contracts in yuan. China and Russia trade in their currencies. Central banks buy record amounts of gold. Reserve currency status does not disappear immediately. It fades, slowly, then suddenly. And when it's over, Phase 7 isn't far behind. What Phases 6 and 7 might look like in the US. Why collapse can happen suddenly, even when the rate of decline is slow. And what ordinary people should understand, not panic, not deny, about living at the turning point of an empire's lifespan. Stage 6, Stage 7, and what happens when an empire finally collapses. Stage 6 is the most misunderstood step in the fall of an empire. People imagined it was an announcement, a press conference, a treaty, a dramatic declaration that the dollar is no longer the reserve currency. It didn't happen like that. Empires don't lose their reserve currency status in headlines. They lose it in habit. A trade deal here no longer uses dollars. A central bank there buys gold instead of treasury bonds. The shipping contract is paid in RMB. Commodity transactions are settled in rupees. This is not a coup, it is erosion. And the erosion is always invisible until the foundation suddenly collapses. Stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. To understand this stage, imagine a dam. A giant concrete wall is holding back trillions of gallons of water. From a distance, it looks indestructible. But what about up close? A few cracks. There are a few leaks. Small cracks spread silently within the structure. That is the US dollar today. For the past 80 years, the dollar has been more than just a currency. That is power. That is obedience. That is the price of participation in the global system that America built. Countries don't hold dollars because they like the United States. They keep dollars because they had to. Oil contracts are priced in dollars. International loans in dollars. Reserves are stored in US Treasury bonds. Every country holds the currency of the American empire. But now what? The cracks are becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. BRICS nations are openly discussing an alternative settlement system. Saudi Arabia is accepting Chinese yuan to buy oil, something unthinkable 10 years ago. China is signing bilateral trade agreements without using dollars. Russia has completely escaped the dollar net. Central banks around the world are buying gold at the fastest rate in modern history, not because they hate America, but because they don't believe in math anymore. Reserve currencies will disappear when the world no longer believes they are safe, and nothing destroys confidence more effectively than debt explosion, speed up money printing, political instability, and a society that seems to be internally divided. America has not lost no reserve status, but it is drifting as approaching that stage in the same way that the Spanish silver lost its prestige, just as the pound lost its prestige, just as the ruble became a political liability. When Phase 6 comes, the empire does not decide when it ends. Foreign creditors do, and their judgment is always cold, mathematical, and decisive. What happens when the right is lost? Something is scary. Trillions of dollars deposited abroad are starting to flow back home. It's not that foreigners want American goods, but because of them, do not want U.S. currency. It becomes a feedback loop. People sell dollars. Weakening dollar. More people selling dollars. The dollar continues to weaken. Imports become expensive. High inflation interest rates skyrocket to curb it. Unpayable debt. Confidence collapses. This cycle accelerates. This is why reserve currency is the last oxygen tank of an empire. When it breaks down, recession becomes collapse. You can no longer financially fund the military. You can't import cheap anymore. You can no longer borrow cheaply. You cannot continue to run budget deficits with impunity. You can't keep printing money without consequences. Phase 6 is the revocation of privileges. Stage 7 is the stage of instability. Stage 7, collapse. Collapse is not always fire, riot, or invasion. Collapse is the point at which the system can no longer perform its basic function. Maintain confidence. Trust in money. Trust in institutions. Trust in leadership. Believe in the future. Spain collapsed into disunity and irrelevance. He fell into a state of austerity and geopolitical dependence. The Soviet Union collapsed in a state of political disintegration and economic chaos. The fall of every empire is different, but the basic logic is always the same. When the core weakens enough, the entire structure will collapse at once. For the United States, a Phase 7 scenario could include 1. Dollar crisis. The value of the dollar fell suddenly and dramatically. Foreigners dumped treasury bonds. Import prices skyrocketed. Savings evaporated. 2. Debt crisis. Interest payments become impossible. The government faces a choice: public by default or quietly default due to hyperinflation. Most empires chose silence. 3. A banking emergency. Banks that rely on treasury collateral will be hit first. Then the credit markets froze. The company then went bankrupt due to lack of liquidity. 4. Supply chain issues. A country that imports a large proportion of its essential goods will suffer when its currency weakens. 5. Political crisis. Polarization turns to paralysis. Then the paralysis turns into conflict. Then the conflict turns to something darker. 6. Loss of global influence. Defensive allies. Enemies test boundaries. Foreign bases were abandoned. Diplomacy became desperate. 7. Institutional disintegration. Government agencies became dysfunctional. Nations began to act independently. Social services are overwhelmed or collapsing. Infrastructure is deteriorating faster than it can be repaired. This doesn't require war. It doesn't require an asteroid, a coup, or an invasion. Just do the math and you can catch up. Why is the collapse sudden? For the average person, collapse always comes suddenly. It's not because they're not smart, but because they are not in the room where the decisions are made. The warning was given slowly. The decline is slow. The denial is huge. But when is confidence broken? It happened faster than anyone could comprehend. Spain once seemed mighty until it declared bankruptcy 4 times. Britain seemed stable until the pound crashed in 1931. The Soviet Union seemed intact until it disappeared after 900 days. Empires do not die like trees. They die like glass, sometimes solid, sometimes broken. And today, the United States has the full spectrum of pressure-resistant glass. Dangerous illusion. This time is different. Every empire says so. Spain, England, and the Soviet Union all said so. Civilizations have always believed that their technology, wealth, military, and culture keep them from decline. But models do not care about specificity. They are interested in numerology. You cannot. Trillion-dollar deficits forever. Print money infinitely. Deindustrialize your economy. Divide your society into hostile factions. Rely on debt to pay interest on more debt. Expand your army across the planet without reaching the mathematical limit. That limit is stage 6, stage 7. What does this mean for the average person? This documentary is not about fear. The issue is clarity. Empires rise, empires fall. And the common man survived by understanding this important thing. The collapse changed the environment, but did not end the world. Throughout history, survivors and rebuilders have understood 5 truths. Truth 1, diversification is survival. It's not just about money, skill, source of income, geography, relationships. Empires fall, but people adapt. Fact 2, the nominal amount doesn't matter. In collapsing empires, wages rise while purchasing power falls. Wealth becomes an illusion. Just one reality, important assets. Truth 3, local resilience is more important than global power. As the empire collapsed, local communities became the lifeblood. People rediscover the importance of connection, trust, and collaboration. Truth 4, crises punish the unprepared and reward those who adapt. Every collapse destroys some people and open up opportunities for others. Fact 5, panic is death, but awareness is power. Knowledge does not prevent collapse. It helps you not to be surprised by it. History is clear. This model is consistent. Mathematics is unforgiving. Every empire, when it reaches the height of its power, says to itself, we are different, we are modern, we are special. That can't happen here. But it happened. Every time. Here's the question the average American must ask today. If every empire believed itself exceptional just before its collapse, what makes us sure that we are not just the next chapter in the same story? If this documentary opened your eyes, forcing you to see the world through a different perspective, you need to know what happens next. Because Phase 6 and Phase 7 are not just economic events. They are people with political views. They are sociable and highly individualistic. And if the past is any guide, they happened faster than anyone expected. So when the next crack appears, you will understand what it means, why it happened, and how ordinary people can survive. The collapse of something previously thought unbreakable. The answer is not hidden in the future. They were written in the past, and I'll tell you where to look.